Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation with California Congressman Pete Aguilar. I had to cut you off, and I apologize for that. I want to pick up where we left off. You are now finishing up this lame duck session before you move into this leadership role. We are seeing the focus really just being on keeping the government funded. As part of that, will you be able to put in the hundreds of millions of dollars that so many mayors are asking for to shore up border security in the next few weeks? You're from California, so a number of California mayors wrote this letter this past week.
I'm not familiar with the letter. I'm a member of the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee, though. I can tell you these are conversations that we continue to have with our Republican colleagues each and every year as part of the regular order of the appropriations process. The number one goal is to fund government, and we're going to have to rely on reasonable Republicans to help us do that because so much is at stake. Just in your segment earlier, Mike Turner talked about the Ukraine funding, and I appreciate his willingness to meet us and to talk about the importance of Ukraine funding. But there are so many Republicans who are tied to this MAGA extremism who are talking about putting conditions on Ukrainian aid. We can't have that. That's the reason why we have to have reasonable budgets, and an important point of why we have to have this time right now. We need to have government funding, and we look forward to working with Republicans to get that done.
The specific request was for $500 million for FEMA and $300 million for humanitarian assistance because of this concern about Title 42 lifting at the end of this month. You don't know if that's going to be.
We need to do everything we can to make sure that our border communities are taken care of. We had to do that previously, and we appreciate the administration and Homeland Security doing everything that they can to give humanitarian aids and grants to those communities to make sure that they could deal with those effects. It's important for us. There are so many ways that we can be helpful, and on the heels of the Trump administration separating children from parents, we appreciate the Biden administration coming in and being so thoughtful about how they do this. But it's gonna be a process. And we look forward to working with our local government and state allies to do it.
So also in the lame duck, you are continuing to serve on this January 6th committee, which is coming to an end at the end of the month. Your colleague Zoe Lofgren was on this program a few weeks ago, and she said all the evidence for good or ill will be out within the month. When? How? When will we know when you've come to a conclusion?
Well, I'm not going to get in front of Zoe Lofgren if she wants to tell you that. But I can tell you that Chairman Benny Thompson, Vice Chair Liz Cheney, we're all committed to the transparency of this process, to putting out a fulsome report that talks about the facts and circumstances about what happened on January 6th. And Zoe Lofgren also has talked about, and Adam Kinzinger has talked about, there are important things that we have learned along the way within January 6th that we feel should be shared to the American public. And so we're going to do that. We're going to do it in a thoughtful way. Members are working each and every day, editing and looking at the documents that we will be putting out in accordance with House rules. We are preserving the important documents, and we're going to be transparent about this process. The American public will see a full report.
Okay. Will the Justice Department get all the underlying documents? Merrick Garland said at a press conference earlier in the week that they'd like to get a hold of your evidence.
We look forward to the Department of Justice and the American public seeing all of the work that we have done. And that includes transcripts and documents. There are soon, very soon, Margaret, and I think in the next couple weeks. But clearly our committee ends on January 2nd. And so we're going to do this this month and put this information out.
Do you personally believe that at this point there is enough evidence to send a criminal referral to the Justice Department regarding the former president?
I'm not going to get ahead of what our report may or may not say. And I know you're asking personally.
Yeah, Cheney have said that.
Yeah.
You're not so sure?
I think that the evidence is pretty clear. I think we laid out a case to the American public. Who is responsible, who is primarily responsible for whipping up that crowd, sending them to the Capitol, and people's lives being endangered, and Capitol police officers losing their lives. I think it's pretty clear, based on the evidence, based on the hearings that we've done, who was responsible. But right now, we're to the point. We have a couple weeks remaining here, and we're going to have more to say. The committee's going to have more to say on this through our documents and through our public releases, so I don't want to get ahead of that.
The possibly incoming Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, has vowed to hold hearings about why the Capitol complex wasn't secure on January 6th, and he has faulted your committee for not focusing enough on this. How do you respond to that question of why there isn't more of a focus on security breakdowns?
If and when that individual becomes the possible speaker and can count the votes to get there, I have my doubts. Look, we stand willing for anybody to stand the test of time and to look at the history and the documents of what we've put forward. But we are talking about security. We are talking about what happened that day. I think that what's happening is Kevin McCarthy has to do anything he can to appease the MAGA extremists within his party. He's trying to count to 218. If that means sending subpoenas to the committee members, if that means being tough to committee members, that's what he has to do right now, because he's practically auctioning off real estate in the Capitol in order to secure the votes.
Well, he is also one of the people that your committee has asked to come speak and share information. He has refused to do so. Jim Jordan, also potentially in a leadership role, has refused to do so. What consequences do you think there should be? Should there be criminal referrals? I don't even know if you can do that. Can you?
No, that's not our intent. What we wanted to lay out to the American public is that those individuals, Jim Jordan and Kevin McCarthy, are fact witnesses to the events that happened. They talked to the president multiple times on that day. There's information that they can share. There's information that they shared on national TV and to their own colleagues in that moment. The fact that they don't want to share it to us so we can put together a fulsome report just shows that they aren't unbiased. And so that's why there's a little smirk when you ask me about Kevin McCarthy and January 6th, because he's someone who hasn't been completely honest about what he knows and what happened that day.
Congressman, congratulations on the historic achievement. I know you said it means a lot for your family and for people back home. And I do want to acknowledge being the first is a big deal.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Margaret.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be right back with former Attorney General Eric Holder, so stay with us. We turn now to former Attorney General Eric Holder. He now heads up the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and he has a book, Our Unfinished March, which examines the current state of America's democracy. Welcome back to the program.
It's good to see you, Margaret.
I have a number of things I want to get to with you, but I want to start on something I know is immediate this week. An organization that you run that we mentioned here that focuses on redistricting is involved in a Supreme Court case, Moore versus Harper. It's going to be heard on the 7th of this week. And it boils down, as I understand it, to the question of what the Constitution means when it assigns state legislatures the task of regulating elections. That sounds really wonky, but you phrased it as the future of democracy being at stake. What are you worried is actually going to happen here?
Yeah, this case is all about something called the independent state legislature doctrine. It's a fringe theory that North Carolina Republicans are trying to use to make sure that the North Carolina Republican legislature has the sole responsibility of doing redistricting in the state and excluding from that determination the state court system. It is something that, if the Supreme Court goes along with it, would really upend our system of checks and balances, and it's for that reason that I am extremely concerned. It is a fringe theory. This is something that, if the court, I think, does the right thing, you should have a 9-0 opinion by the court that rejects this notion of this independent state legislature doctrine that has been rejected by conservative scholars, by practicing Republican lawyers, by former Republican judges, and by this a conference of state Supreme Court justices as well. This is a very, very dangerous theory that would put our system of checks and balances at risk.
So there are a number of Democratic senators who actually filed a brief urging the Supreme Court not even to hear the case. So there are some heavy hitters here saying don't even talk about it. What does that tell you about the potential harm here? I mean, is there value in the Supreme Court hearing this and striking it down, or does them hearing it at all indicate something more to you?
Yeah, it's hard for me to see how this case was ever taken by the court. I think the better thing would have been for the court to simply have rejected it. But now, having taken the case, I would hope that the court would drive a stake through this notion of this independent state legislature doctrine and get it off the books and out of our consideration once and for all. It truly is, I cannot emphasize this enough, it truly is a fringe theory that should result in a 9-0 rejection of the theory.
So we mentioned you're working on redistricting. Democrats are suing to overturn congressional maps in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, and Texas. I read a quote from you in the Washington Post that said the work you've been doing on redistricting has paid off in the most recent midterms. Do you think that your legal battles will help Democrats make gains in 2024? What are you trying to say there?
Yeah, I think that what we have seen, there have been studies that said that we have had the most fair redistricting process in the last 40 years as a result of the work that we've done. 75% of the redistricting is considered to be fair, which also means that 25% of it is unfair, and that is still problematic. I think, for instance, the House of Representatives is going to be in play for the entirety of this decade, very contrary to where it was in the past decade, where after the successful Republican gerrymandering that occurred in 2011 and in 2012, it was really difficult for Democrats to take the House back. I think Democrats will be able to take the House back as early as 2024, but it doesn't ensure. What we have done doesn't ensure that Democrats are going to hold on to the House for the entirety of the decade. It will be for the American people to decide. Fairness will reign in that determination.
When you were last on this program in May, you shared at the time that you had changed your mind recently, that you did believe that the Justice Department and Attorney General Merrick Garland should hold former President Trump accountable for his actions. You previously thought it would be too divisive for the country. Now, where we are with this special counsel, what is your assessment? And how should Merrick Garland, who has to ultimately decide, weigh the question of a risk to political violence in this country from any decision he makes regarding the former president?
Well, I think the Attorney General has said it quite well, that he'll make the determination without fear or favor. Everybody has to be held accountable to the same system. The determination that he's going to have to make will have to be based on the facts and the law, and we'll just have to deal with the consequences. The reality is that if he makes a determination one way or the other, it is going to be divisive. And so the best thing simply is to make sure that everybody who is under consideration for possible criminal treatment, including the former president, is treated just like every other American. And that's what that opinion out of the circuit court this week essentially said, that you can't craft things, as that district court judge, you can't craft things for a former president that don't exist for regular American citizens. Treat everybody in the same way, make the determination based on the facts and the law. And the United States, I think, has the capacity to absorb a possible indictment and to deal with it fairly and to get on with the business of the country.
As someone who's been an attorney general, I wonder as well how you think about the case before the U.S. District Attorney in Delaware regarding President Biden's son, Hunter. CBS has reported the FBI has sufficient evidence to charge him with tax and gun-related crimes. How would you handle this? A plea deal? Is the Attorney General boxed in to take a hardline position because of working for the president?
No, I mean, they left in place the the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Delaware to consider the case. You've got career lawyers working on it, career FBI agents. You want to listen to their recommendations and then again, make a determination based on the facts and the law. The defendant should not be treated any more harshly because of who he is related to, should not be given breaks because of who he is or who he is related to. He should be treated as former President Trump, should be treated just like any other American citizen. If there is culpability, that person should be held liable for his or her acts. And if there is not a basis for a case should not be brought.
But it will ultimately come to the Attorney General's desk.
That's certainly the way I would have run the Justice Department, and my guess is also that that would be something that Merrick Garland will be doing as well. That determination will be made, I suspect, in Washington, D.C.
All right. General Holder, thank you very much for your time today. and we'll be right back with much more Face the Nation. We turn now to the economy and the mixed signals about its future. Brian Moynihan is the CEO and chairman of the board of Bank of America, and it's good to see you back here in person.
It's good to be back here. It's been a couple of years. Last time was right when the pandemic started.
I know, I know, and I remember what a chilling moment that was, and yet we are still living through the implications of that pandemic. Your firm is predicting a recession in 2023, but a brief and a mild one. I wonder when it hits and what a mild recession feels like for the average American.
Well, just to sort of be concrete on numbers, they basically picked negative growth around 1% or so for the first 3 quarters of 23, and then it comes back to positive growth. That means the year is negative overall, but it's just 1%. So you think about the recession, when we were sitting here, we went down 30% that next quarter and stuff. So this is a more mild recession, largely because the underlying activity is still strong, and that's the tension in the Fed trying to cool down inflation while at the same time not drive the economy into a deep recession.
Mm-hmm. But when people hear recession, it affects their planning for the future. It affects their feeling of security in the jobs they have. I mean, just this past week, we saw a string of job cuts being announced at tech companies, at media companies. Is this the beginning of a wave?
Well, this is what happens. And when you raise interest rates, the Fed is trying to slow down economic activity. And where does it slow down? First, the most rate sensitive houses. Housing's tipped over. Cars, prices go up, although sales have stayed strong on new cars because they weren't there and they just have become available. But used car prices have tipped back down. So they're the most rate sensitive are affected by it. What takes longer to happen is the final demand for entertainment, for hotels, for travel is still very strong. And so if you look at spending in our customers, for the month of November, it was about 5% over last year. If you go back and think earlier in the year, it was running 10%, 12%. So what's happening is consumers are slowing down their spending. They still have money in their accounts. It's starting to come down a little bit. They still have borrowing capacity, but they've started to use it. So all that means that the Fed rate hikes are slowing down the economy. The question is, when will inflation tip down, and then they can back off? And that's the tension. So we've gone from was inflation temporary, which is last year's discussion, to it's real. Now the question is, how long will they have to hold rates here? How long would they have to hold rates at this level to keep the economy, to get inflation down without hopefully hurting the economy? And that's the debate we're going through right now. But you're seeing the signs in terms of job openings declining a little bit. You're seeing the signs of turnover slowing down in companies. And while those may not be good signs for the individual involved, it's actually good signs for the economy in terms of it starting to get into a better situation that it can grow at a more normalized rate.
Mm-hmm. You're fairly characterizing all the different pieces here, but you do sound more optimistic than many of your peers, even those who are predicting a recession, like J.P. Morgan. They famously, their strategist said a Category 1 economic hurricane is on the horizon. What would move you from mild to gale force winds? I mean, what changes things along the way?
Well, the belief was when the Fed started raising rates that there'd be an immediate snap to the economy. The thing that didn't happen, those predictions were from the spring of this year in 22. What didn't happen, because the consumers remained strong and the amount of stimulus that got in the economy was so high, it didn't happen the way people thought. Unemployment is still 3.7.
Right.
They just had 200,000 jobs. So how could you have an unemploymentless recession? That's almost hard to posture, right? So all the math and science that people had looked at for years has kind of gotten thrown astray because a massive stimulus went in. So if you looked where all the guests you had on this morning talked about parades of horribles, the Russia-Ukraine situation, what's going on in China. Those things all would change the basic outlook. But if they just stay, right now it's contemplated they stay sort of status quo ante. It doesn't solve, but it doesn't get worse.
Right.
Oil prices stay around $100 a barrel, more or less. They were there for 5 years between 2010 and 2015. So none of that kills the economy on its own. But all those things going in a very wrong direction, you'd see a massive change in the economic activity. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are trying to hamstring. In the base projections most people have, the Wall Street firms and stuff, it's all pretty similar. So a shallow recession with recovery later, rates stay a lot higher than people think for a longer period of time, meaning all the way into the end of 24, because inflation's harder to choke off because there's such underlying cash in the system. And that's what nobody's ever dealt with. Now, where does that cash come from? The government gave out a lot of stimulus. The problem is the government's running high deficits, and that's why when you talk earlier about debt ceilings, those are important things to not have create problems in the economy. And I think all business people—
That's one of your worries for 2023.
All business people don't like surprises, and we'd like to make sure that we got through a normal budget process and a normal debt ceiling process. And
But you're not confident about that.
well, I've been CEO for
political.
13 years now, and I've had some interesting times on this, but generally it works out. And I have confidence that people come to the table. There'll be a lot of discussion, you talked about with some of your guests, but ultimately it has to get there because ultimately we have to run this great country because it's got 300 million people that the world depend on.
So economy and the market, not the same thing, but the political, the adage was that political gridlock is good for the markets. That's the way it used to be. I wonder if the environment's different now. Your strategist also said they're bearish. They worry unemployment in 2023 will be as shocking to Main Street consumer sentiment as inflation was in 2022. So how do you recommend to clients they protect themselves if we're going to see the markets possibly take a downturn?
Well, unemployment, our team would predict it gets back up to 5%. That's say 1.5% from where we are now. That is 150-odd million workers. So but that's where it was, 2 years before, 17, 18, so 17, 16. So we didn't feel horrible then. The question is, it's just a change where people lose their jobs, and that's a horrible thing to contemplate. And that's what they're worried about. The compounding effect of the worry about having a job versus actually losing your job changes consumer behavior, and you're seeing that go on a little bit right now. And the Fed has to create that sort of nervousness to help tip the inflation back down. Wage growth is strong, which is a good thing, but also strong means they have to slow it down to match otherwise we're going to have a wage inflation spiral. So all that comes together. So as you think about it, think about next year is really important to see the mitigating impact of these things. The employment market gets less tight. It is already less tight, continues to get less tight. Therefore, wage growth slows down. Therefore, inflation will slow down. If that doesn't happen, then the Fed's going to have to go a lot higher. There's economists that think they should. But if they get it there, they can hold it there and let the system catch up to it.
Why are savings yields so much lower than where the inflation rate is? Why aren't people making more money in their savings
There's
accounts?
a lag effect to the change in rates and prices and everything. And so what they'll do is they keep coming up, and each month you'll see them come up as people pay higher rates to retain the funds. The big difference between the last time we went through a rate tightening cycle now is the amount of cash in the system is so high that banks have a lot of liquidity. They're well capitalized. They're very strong. And that's even going back to our discussion March 20. The difference is the banks are very strong. They helped the clients through it. They didn't cause any problems. They're very strong. So what's going to happen is they're going to be more conservative to recover the 15 years of low rate environment where they under earn.
Right.
They're recovering, but ultimately they'll come to reach more equilibrium.
Brian Moynihan, thank you for your time today. We'll have more on the economy and the forecast for 2023 next week with Jamie Dimon, the chairman and CEO of JPMorgan Chase. We'll be back in a moment. If you can't watch the full Face the Nation, you can set your DVR. Plus, you can watch through our CBS or Paramount Plus app. Thank you all for watching. We'll be right here next Sunday. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.